The night the widow, Miriam, screamed, I knew everything was about to fall apart. Her voice was raw, like the sound of an animal caught in a trap. It wasn't the kind of scream you hear every day. It was something that made your stomach churn. My husband, Bodhi, was known across the village, not for his kindness, but for the way he took what wasn't his when debts weren't paid. Bodhi's first victim was an old farmer named Baba Afalabi. Baba had borrowed money to fix his leaky roof during the rainy season. When the rain stopped, his crops didn't yield enough for him to pay back the loan. Bodhi came to his compound one morning with his boys and demanded the deed to Baba's farmland. Baba begged, saying the land had been in his family for generations. Bodhi didn't care. If you can't pay, the land is mine, he said. Baba handed over the deed with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. Bodhi was on his way to Nankwa market when he met Jide, the village carpenter. He had taken a loan from Bodhi to buy wood for a big job, but the client refused to pay Jide on time, and he fell behind on the loan. Bodhi gave him 2 warnings, then showed up at his workshop with his boys. They loaded up all of Jide's tools and claimed the small plot where his workshop stood. Without his tools or land, Jide had to leave the village to find work. Bodhi went to buy Christmas goat from Kola, a goat herder with a small but thriving flock. He pleaded with Bodhi to borrow him money to pay for medicine because the wife fell ill. There and then they wrote agreement. Bodhi borrowed him money. The wife recovered, but Kola's goats began dying mysteriously, leaving him unable to repay the debt. Bodhi showed up one morning with his boys and took the few goats that were still alive. You're lucky I'm not taking your house too, Bodhi said as Kola stood there helpless. His relation Tunde was a fisherman who borrowed from Bodhi to repair his canoe. One stormy night the canoe sank and Tunde lost everything. He pleaded with Bodhi for more time to pay back the loan, but Bodhi refused. The next morning, he sent his boys to seize the nets and equipment that Tunde had left. You'll have to fish with your hands now, Bodhi said with a cruel laugh. Bodhi came to buy palm wine at Afor market when Amara, a single mother raising her children on the income from her chickens, approached him for loan. Few days later, she borrowed money from Bodhi to buy more chicks, hoping to expand her business. But when the market prices for eggs dropped, she couldn't pay the loan. Bodhi told to come to his house on the market when his wife will not be around so she can pay with kind, but Amara refused. Bodhi arrived at her farm with his boys, loaded up all her chickens into cages, and left her with nothing. Amara cried for days, unable to explain to her children why their home was now silent and empty. Maybe next time you'll think twice before taking a loan you can't repay, Bodhi said, smirking, as he walked away with a cruel laugh. One day, a trader named Mama Aka owed Bodhi money but couldn't pay. Instead of waiting, Bodhi followed her to the market. He walked straight to her stall, picked up all her baskets of yams, and loaded them into his cart. This will cover part of your debt, he said, ignoring her protests. Mama Ika cried out to the other traders for help, but they only shook their heads. No one dared cross Bodhi. Despite all his wealth, Bode refused to pay his children's university fees. He had 3 sons and 2 daughters, all bright and ambitious, but he claimed education was a waste of money. "Let them fend for themselves," he told me when I pleaded with him. "If they're smart, they'll figure it out." One by one, his children had to drop out of school. Some left the village to find work, while others stayed, bitter and resentful, watching as Bode squandered his riches on wine and women. Kunle borrowed money from Bode during the planting season when his seeds failed to germinate. He needed to buy new seeds quickly before the rains stopped. Bode gave him the money with a steep interest rate. When the harvest came, it was poor, and Kunle couldn't pay. He went to Bode, kneeling in his compound. "Please, give me more time," Kunle begged. "My wife and children will starve if you take everything." Bode dismissed him with a wave. "You've had your time," he said coldly. Kunle died suddenly from a fever, leaving Mariam with the debt. Bode didn't care. Bode took the field and sold it to someone from another village. Miriam was left with nothing to support her children and had to rely on charity from neighbors to survive. "A debt is a debt," he'd say, smiling in that way that made my skin crawl. "The man is dead, but his woman is still alive. She will pay." I begged him that night not to go. "She has nothing left," I whispered, clutching his arm. "Leave her alone, Bode. The children need their mother." He shrugged me off like I was nothing. "She'll survive," he said. "Maybe not the way she wants to, but that's not my concern. A deal is a deal." That night, he went to take the widow. I heard the shouting from where I stood in our compound, watching through the narrow crack of the wooden gate. Her children were crying, holding onto her legs, begging Bode to leave her alone. "You can't take me," Mariam yelled, her voice shaking but fierce. "This isn't right. My husband is gone. I have nothing to give you." "You have sold our land. It not enough, you'll work it off," Bode replied, calm as ever. "You can cook, clean, or whatever I say. You'll stay in my house until the debt is settled." "You're a wicked man," she spat at him. "You'll pay for this one day." Bode just laughed. "If I had a kobo for every time someone said that, I wouldn't need this debt." People came out of their houses, but no one stepped forward to help. The villagers only stood there, watching, whispering to one another, but doing nothing. "Leave her alone," someone muttered, but the voice was weak and quickly drowned out by Bode's booming commands. "Mind your business," he barked at the crowd. "This is between me and the widow. If anyone wants to pay her debt, speak now." Silence. No one dared. No one ever dared. I wanted to scream, to beg him again to stop, but I knew better. Bode's temper was sharp, and his punishments were worse. I was trapped, just like Mariam. That night, Mariam arrived in our house. Her face was swollen from crying, her shoulders hunched like she was carrying the weight of the world. Bode didn't care. He locked her in the small room by the kitchen, telling me to bring her food once a day and not to talk to her. "She's not a guest," he said. "She's here to work, not to be pampered." I nodded, my heart heavy. Miriam didn't speak to me at first. She just sat in the corner of the room, staring at the wall, refusing to eat. Her children had been left behind, and I couldn't imagine the pain she was feeling. But over the weeks, something changed. She started to talk, little by little. She told me about Kunli, how much he had loved their family, how hard he had worked before the debt swallowed him whole. "It's not just the money," she whispered one night. "It's what he took from us, our dignity, our peace." I nodded. I understood more than she knew. One evening, something unexpected happened. Miriam stood up. She wasn't crying anymore. Her eyes were sharp, her voice steady. "I won't stay here forever," she said. I didn't know what she meant, but I felt a chill run through me. The villagers began to talk. They whispered about Mariam's strength, about how she refused to break under Bode's control. Some even started to say she had a plan, though no one knew what it was. Bode didn't notice. He was too busy collecting more debts, ruining more lives. But I noticed. Mariam was changing. She was no longer the broken widow who had arrived at our door. She was something else. I'll never forget the night it all came crashing down. It was late, the air thick and heavy. Bodhi had just returned from the market, drunk and laughing, bragging about how much money he had made. Mariam was waiting. When he entered the house, she confronted him. Her voice was steady, but there was fire in her eyes. "You've taken enough," she said. "You'll take no more." Bode laughed in her face. "And what will you do?" But Mariam didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at him, her hands clenched into fists. The next thing I knew, the door burst open and the villagers poured in. Men, women, even children, they all came, carrying sticks and torches. "We've had enough," someone shouted. Bode tried to fight them off, but it was no use. The people were tired of his cruelty, his greed. They dragged him out into the street, his screams echoing through the night. Miriam stood by the door, watching silently. Bode was never seen again. Some say he ran away. Others believe the villagers made sure he would never return. Mariam went back to her children. The debt was forgotten, and the village began to heal. As for me, one of my daughters whom traveled abroad came to the village and took me with her. I stayed in America, trying to pick the piece my life back together. I had lived in Bode's shadow for too long, and now I am happy living with my children. But one thing was clear. The village would never forget the widow who stood up to a monster and won.